The autumn sun beat down mercilessly on Bitter Creek, turning the dusty Main Street into a furnace. Margaret Sullivan stood in the doorway of Morrison's saloon, her black widow's dress hanging loose on her frame. 6 months had passed since cholera took her husband Tom, and in those months, she'd learned how quickly a woman could fall from respectable to worthless in the eyes of a frontier town. Get inside, woman," Morrison barked from behind the bar, his thick fingers drumming impatiently on the scarred wood. "You're scaring away customers standing there like a ghost." Margaret's jaw tightened, but she obeyed. What choice did she have? Tom's debts had eaten through their meager savings, and Morrison had generously offered her work scrubbing floors, washing glasses, enduring the leers and wandering hands of drunken men who saw a widow as fair game. The saloon reeked of tobacco, sweat, and spilled whiskey. A dozen men lounged at tables, their eyes following Margaret as she moved to fetch her bucket and rags. She'd grown used to their stares, the way they stripped her dignity with their eyes, reducing her to nothing more than a burden the town didn't want. "Hey, Morrison," called out Jake Hutchkins, a cattle hand with a face like spoiled meat. "When you gonna stop pretending this ain't a cat house that widow's been cleaning floors long enough?" Laughter rippled through the room. Margaret's hands trembled as she wrung out her rag, but she kept her eyes down, focused on the filthy floorboards. Morrison's laugh was ugliest of all. "Now, Jake, Mrs. Sullivan here is a respectable woman. Ain't that right, Margaret?" She said nothing. There was nothing to say that wouldn't make things worse. "Though I'll admit," Morrison continued, his voice taking on a calculating edge, "she ain't earning her keep. Food and lodging ain't free, and them floors ain't getting any cleaner." Margaret's stomach clenched. She'd heard this tone before, when Morrison was working up to something cruel. "Tell you what, boys," Morrison announced, spreading his arms wide like a showman. "I got a proposition. Our Margaret here owes me near $50 in back rent and board. Now, I'm a businessman, not a charity, so I'm thinking, why not let the market decide her worth?" The room grew quiet, anticipation crackling in the air like lightning before a storm. "What are you saying, Morrison?" someone asked. "I'm saying," Morrison grinned, showing tobacco-stained teeth, "that I'm willing to transfer Mrs. Sullivan's debt to any man willing to pay it off. Call it a business arrangement. She needs a protector. You boys need, well, a man's got needs." Margaret's rag fell from nerveless fingers. She straightened slowly, disbelief and horror warring in her chest. "You can't be serious." "Serious as a rattlesnake, sweetheart. You're drowning in debt with no way to pay. I'm offering you a lifeline." "You're offering to sell me like livestock. Now that ain't fair," Morrison said, his voice hardening. "I'm offering these gentlemen the opportunity to pay your debts in exchange for, let's call it domestic services. You'd be free to negotiate the terms with your new benefactor." The men in the saloon stirred, some with interest, others with discomfort. Margaret saw Big Pete Coleman shift in his seat, his eyes avoiding hers. They'd attended the same church once, back when she'd been a respectable married woman. Now he looked at her like she was already soiled goods. I'll give you $20, Hutchkins called out. "That's all a used-up widow's worth anyway." "25, countered another voice. Margaret felt the room spinning. This couldn't be happening. She was a human being, not chattel to be auctioned. But as she looked around the room at the faces of men she'd once considered neighbors, she saw no allies, no saviors, just predators and cowards. "You're all insane," she whispered, then louder. "You're all insane. This is 1862, not ancient Rome. You can't sell people." Morrison slammed his fist on the bar. "I ain't selling nobody. I'm transferring a debt. You don't like it, pay me what you owe and walk out that door. Otherwise, shut your mouth and be grateful these men are willing to bid it all." $30, Big Pete mumbled, still not meeting her eyes. 35, and I'll take her tonight," Hutchkins leered. Margaret backed against the wall, her breath coming in short gasps. This was a nightmare. It had to be. Any moment she'd wake in her tiny room above the saloon, and the saloon doors swung open with enough force to bang against the walls. Every head turned to the entrance, where a tall figure stood silhouetted against the blazing afternoon sun. As he stepped inside, Margaret's first thought was that Death himself had come to Bitter Creek. The man was clearly Indian Comanche. By the look of his clothing and the way he carried himself, tall and lean, with bronze skin marked by sun and weather, long black hair tied back with a leather cord. He wore a mix of traditional and white man's clothing, buckskin pants, a cotton shirt, a vest decorated with beadwork. A knife hung at his hip, and though he carried no visible gun, something about him radiated danger. Behind him, barely visible in the doorway, stood a boy of perhaps 8 or 9 years, obviously his son. The saloon fell dead silent. Indians occasionally came to town to trade, but never alone, never this boldly, and never into Morrison's place. Morrison's hand moved toward the shotgun under the bar. "We don't serve your kind here. Chief, best move along." The Comanche's dark eyes swept the room. Taking in the scene, Margaret pressed against the wall. The men seated like vultures, the atmosphere thick with cruelty. When his gaze met Margaret's, she saw something flicker there. Recognition, no. That was impossible, but something— "I have gold," the man said, his English accented but clear. "I come to trade." "I said we don't." The Comanche reached into a pouch at his belt and withdrew several gold coins, setting them on the nearest table with deliberate precision. Real gold, not the paper money that had become increasingly common since the war started. Morrison's eyes glinted with greed. "Well now, that's different. What is it you're looking to buy?" The Comanche's gaze returned to Margaret. The word fell into the silence like a stone into still water. "What?" Morrison sputtered. "You sell woman. Yes, I hear outside. $35. The ugly one said, I pay 50. Gold." Hutchkins lurched to his feet. "Now wait just a damn minute." The Comanche's hand moved to his knife hilt, a gesture so casual it was all the more menacing. "You object. We settle this outside." Hutchkins sat back down. Morrison found his voice. That ain't how this works. You can't just—" "Why?" The Comanche's voice was soft, dangerous. "Because I'm Comanche, you sell women to white men, but not to me." "It ain't about that," Morrison lied. "It's just $60 gold," the Comanche said, adding more coins to the pile. "Final offer." The room held its breath. $60 in gold was more than most of these men saw in 6 months. Morrison's greed warred with his prejudice, and Margaret could see the exact moment greed won. "Well now," Morrison said slowly, "if the lady agrees." All eyes turned to Margaret. She felt like a rabbit surrounded by wolves, but now one of the wolves was offering her a different cage. She looked at the Comanche, trying to read his impassive face. Why was he doing this? What did he want with her? But then she looked at Hutchins's eager face, at Morrison's calculating greed, at Big Pete's shameful desire, and she knew with crystal clarity that staying here meant a slow death of the soul, if not the body. Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat and tried again, addressing the Comanche directly. "What do you want with me?" He studied her for a long moment. "You work, cook, clean, tend horses, care for my son when needed. Nothing else required unless you choose." Unless you choose. 3 words that held more respect than she'd heard in months. "This is insane," someone muttered. A white woman going with a savage. "Savage!" The Comanche's voice cut like a blade. "I see men here selling woman like horse. Who is savage?" Margaret made her decision. "I'll go with you." The room erupted. Shouts of outrage and of disbelief, chairs scraping as men stood. Morrison banged on the bar for order. Margaret, think about what you're doing. Big Pete finally found his voice. You can't go with him. Think of your reputation. A laugh escaped her, bitter as alkali water. My reputation? You were bidding on me like cattle 5 minutes ago. Pete Coleman. At least he's honest about what he wants. The Comanche moved to the bar, his movements fluid and controlled despite the tension crackling in the air. He counted out $60 gold under Morrison's watchful eye. The woman's debts, he asked. Morrison nodded grudgingly. Paid in full. Then we go. He turned to Margaret. You have belongings. Upstairs. Just a bag and... She hesitated. My husband's Bible. Get them. Margaret moved toward the stairs on shaking legs, hardly believing this was happening. Behind her, she heard Hutchkin snarl. This ain't over. Redskin, that's a white woman you're taking. White woman you were selling. The Comanche replied calmly, I pay fair price. Business is done. Margaret climbed the narrow stairs to her tiny room, her mind reeling. She grabbed her carpet bag, already packed with her few possessions, 2 dresses, undergarments, Tom's Bible, their wedding photograph, her mother's silver brush. Everything she owned in the world fit in one small bag. When she returned downstairs, the Comanche was waiting by the door. His son now visible beside him, a serious-faced boy with his father's dark eyes and proud bearing. The men in the saloon watched with a mixture of anger, disgust, and something that might have been envy. This is a mistake, Margaret, Morrison called out as she passed. When he's done with you, don't come crying back here. She paused at the door, looking back at the man who'd made her life miserable for months. Mr. Morrison, you just sold me like trash, but at least he sees something worth buying. Then she stepped out into the blazing sun. Following the Comanche and his son to where 3 horses waited, the man helped her mount a gentle-looking mare, his touch impersonal but respectful. As they rode out of Bitter Creek, Margaret heard the shouts behind them, the threats and curses, but she didn't look back. Whatever lay ahead, it had to be better than what she was leaving behind. The Comanche rode beside her, silent and watchful. After they'd cleared the town limits, he spoke. My name is Daniel Crow Feather. This is my son, Little Wolf. You are safe with us. Why? Margaret asked, the question that had been burning in her throat. Why did you buy me? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, they sell you like trash, but I see fire in you, trying not to die out. Fire should not be wasted. Margaret felt tears sting her eyes, the first tears she'd allowed herself in months. As Bitter Creek disappeared behind them and the vast prairie opened ahead, she realized she'd just traded one unknown for another. But for the first time in half a year, she felt something that might have been hope. The autumn sun was still merciless, but somehow it didn't feel quite as heavy on her shoulders anymore. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, a sea of golden grass rippling in the wind. Margaret had never ventured more than a few miles from town, and the sheer vastness of the landscape made her feel small and exposed. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange that would have been beautiful if she weren't so terrified. They had ridden in silence for nearly 2 hours. Daniel Crowfeather led the way with the natural ease of someone born to the saddle, while his son Little Wolf rode beside him, occasionally glancing back at Margaret with undisguised suspicion. She gripped her reins with white knuckles, her body stiff and aching from the unfamiliar motion of the horse. We stop here, Daniel announced suddenly, guiding his horse toward a small cluster of cottonwood trees near a creek bed. Margaret's mare followed automatically, and she nearly cried with relief at the prospect of rest. Her legs trembled as Daniel helped her dismount, his hand steady but impersonal on her waist. The moment her feet touched ground, her knees buckled. You don't ride much? He observed, not unkindly. No, she admitted, embarrassment burning her cheeks. Tom, my husband, we had a wagon, but I rarely... She trailed off, unsure why she was explaining herself to this stranger who had bought her like property. Daniel nodded and turned away, beginning to unsaddle his horse with practiced movements. "Little Wolf, gather wood for fire," he instructed in English, though Margaret suspected it was for her benefit. The boy shot her a dark look before disappearing into the gathering dusk. Left alone with Daniel, Margaret stood awkwardly, unsure what was expected of her. In town, there had always been work floors to scrub, glasses to wash, drunk men to avoid. Here, in this vast emptiness, she felt utterly lost. "You know how to make camp?" Daniel asked without looking at her.
No, I'm sorry."
He paused in his work, turning to study her. In the fading light, his features were hard to read. "Sorry for what? For not knowing what you were never taught." The simple logic of it caught her off guard. Morrison would have berated her for her uselessness. Tom would have been quietly disappointed. But Daniel simply accepted it as fact. "I can learn," she offered tentatively. "Yes," he agreed. "You will learn, or you will not survive. Come, I show you." For the next hour, Daniel taught her the basics of making camp, how to properly hobble a horse so it wouldn't wander but could still graze, how to arrange stones for a fire pit that wouldn't spread to the dry grass, how to position bedrolls to catch the morning sun but avoid the worst of the wind. Little Wolf returned with an armload of dry branches and buffalo chips, still refusing to acknowledge Margaret beyond necessary glances. He spoke to his father in Comanche, the words flowing like water over stones. Daniel responded in the same language, his tone patient but firm. "My son asks why I bring white woman to our fire." Daniel translated, though Margaret suspected the boy's actual words had been less polite. "I tell him you are under my protection now. He will accept this." The fire crackled to life as full darkness settled over the prairie. The temperature had dropped surprisingly fast, and Margaret pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. She watched Daniel produce food from his saddlebags, dried meat, flatbread, and something that looked like pressed berries. "Eat," he said, offering her a portion. The meat was tough and salty, the bread dry, but it was food freely given without obligation or humiliation. Margaret ate slowly, savoring that freedom as much as the sustenance. "Where are we going?" she finally asked. "My people camp 2 days north. Winter camp, before the big snows come." "Your people," Margaret repeated softly. What will they think of me?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, poking at the fire with a stick. "Some will not welcome you. Some will say I am fool, bringing white woman to our fires. Others will remember my wife and understand." "Your wife?" "Dead. 2 winters now." His voice was steady, but Margaret caught the flash of old pain in his eyes. "Sickness took her, same that took many of our people." "I'm sorry," Margaret said, meaning it. She knew the weight of that loss, the way it hollowed you out from the inside. "Your man how long?" 6 months. Cholera." Daniel nodded. "The white man's sickness, it follows your people like shadow. Touches ours too." They lapsed into silence. Little Wolf had curled up in his blankets, though Margaret could tell from his breathing that he wasn't truly asleep. The night sounds of the prairie surrounded them. Insects chirping, wind rustling through grass, the distant howl of a coyote that made her shiver. "You're afraid," Daniel observed. "Yes, of the land of me." Margaret considered the question. "Both. Everything. I don't know what you want from me. I don't know why you paid so much gold for a woman you don't know. I don't know if I'll wake up tomorrow or—" "You think I kill you in sleep, hurt you?" His voice held something that might have been offense. "I don't know what to think. Men in town said—" "They called you savage." "The same men who sell you like horse." Daniel's lips curved in a bitter smile. "Yes, I am savage. I protect my son, provide for my people, honor my dead, very savage." Margaret flushed, hearing her own prejudice reflected back at her. "I didn't mean—" "You meant is natural. Your people teach you to fear mine, as we teach our children to be wary of yours. But I tell you truth now, Margaret Sullivan. I give you choice those men did not. What choice? Daniel gestured to the vast darkness around them. Tomorrow, we reach trading post at Bent's Fork. There is stagecoach there, goes to Fort Laramie. I give you money for passage. You go. Start new life in new place, or you come with me to my people. Work as I said, cook. Clean, tend horses. Help with my son. Learn our ways or keep your own, as you choose. But no one touches you without your consent. This I swear on my wife's memory. Margaret stared at him across the fire. This strange man who had upended her world in a single afternoon. Why would you do that? Pay $60 just to set me free? Not free, he corrected. Different chains maybe, but not free. With my people, you will work hard. Some will be cruel with words, others kind. You will be curiosity, outsider, maybe always. But you will not be nothing. You will not be sold or traded. You will not beg for scraps of respect from men who see you as thing to use. And if I choose the stagecoach, then you go with my blessing and enough gold to start again. I lose $60, but gain knowledge that I did not become like them men who sell women in saloons. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes again. The simple dignity he offered, the recognition of her as a person capable of choice, was more than she'd experienced in months.
I don't understand you.
No, Daniel agreed. But understanding is not required. Only decision. You have until tomorrow to choose. He rose and added more wood to the fire. Sleep now. I keep watch. All night. First part, then wake Little Wolf for his turn. He learns responsibility. Margaret glanced at the boy's still form.
He hates me.
He fears you, Daniel corrected. Fears you bring change. Take his father's attention. He lost mother, fears to lose more. But hate no, hate must be taught, and I have not taught him this. Margaret spread her bedroll where he indicated, close enough to the fire for warmth, but maintaining proper distance. As she lay down, still fully clothed except for her boots, she asked, "What about you? What do you fear?" Daniel was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "I fear making wrong choice. Fear my son grows up in world with no place for him, not white, not fully Indian. Fear my people fade like morning mist. Fear I saved you from one cage only to put you in another." He paused. "But fear worse doing nothing while men sell women like cattle. My wife would spit on me from spirit world if I walked away." "What was her name, your wife?" "Sarah Flying Cloud. She was white, like you, taken in raid as child. Raised Comanche, chose to stay when given chance to return to whites. Chose to marry me. Chose our life until sickness took choice away." The revelation stunned Margaret. Another white woman who had lived among the Comanche by choice. It seemed impossible. Yet here was the proof in Daniel's grief-touched voice. Was she happy? Sometimes. Not always. Life is hard for anyone between two worlds. But she was respected. She was loved. She was mother and wife and woman of the people. She rode horses like warrior, made beautiful beadwork, told stories that made children laugh. She lived. Margaret Sullivan. Not just survived, lived. Margaret closed her eyes, trying to imagine such a life. It seemed as foreign as the moon. Yet something in her chest stirred a tiny spark of possibility. "Rest now," Daniel said softly. "Tomorrow brings choices. Tonight, just rest." Margaret pulled her blanket up to her chin, listening to the alien sounds of the prairie night. Above, more stars than she'd ever seen sparkled in the vast sky. She thought of Tom, of their small life in Bitter Creek that had seemed so safe and predictable. She thought of Morrison's saloon, of the looks that stripped her humanity away piece by piece. Then she looked across the fire at Daniel Crow Feather, keeping watch in the darkness, and wondered if maybe, just maybe. She was brave enough to choose the unknown over the unbearable. Little Wolf stirred in his sleep, muttering something in Comanche. His father answered softly in the same language, the words sounding like comfort, like promise, like home. Margaret closed her eyes and, for the first time in months, fell asleep without fear of what morning would bring. She had a choice to make, yes, but it was hers to make. And that, in itself, was a gift worth $60 gold. The journey stretched into its third day, and Margaret's body screamed with every movement. Her thighs were raw from the saddle, her back ached from the constant motion, and her hands had blistered despite the gloves Daniel had wordlessly handed her that morning. She'd chosen to continue with them past Bent's Fork, a decision that still felt surreal, like someone else had made it. The landscape had changed from open prairie to rolling hills dotted with pine and cedar. Daniel led them along paths invisible to Margaret's eyes, following some internal map built from a lifetime of traveling these lands. Little Wolf had begun riding beside her occasionally, still silent but no longer openly hostile. There. Daniel pointed to a thin column of smoke rising beyond the next hill. My people. Margaret's stomach clenched. The moment of truth was approaching faster than she was ready for. As they crested the hill, the camp spread before them, perhaps 20 lodges arranged in a rough circle, horses grazing nearby, children playing between the dwellings. Dogs barked at their approach, and people emerged to see who came. The reception was immediate and mixed. Some faces showed curiosity, others suspicion, a few outright hostility. Daniel rode straight-backed, ignoring the stares and whispers that followed their progress. Margaret tried to do the same, though her hands trembled on the reins. They stopped before a lodge painted with images of running horses and soaring eagles. A woman emerged tall, strong-featured, perhaps 40 years old. Her dark eyes swept over Margaret with sharp assessment before fixing on Daniel. So, it's true, she said in accented English. You bring a white woman to our fires. Merry elk dancing. Daniel greeted her formally. This is Margaret Sullivan. She will stay with us. Mary's expression remained neutral, but Margaret caught the tightening around her eyes. As what? Brother, another white wife have you learned nothing from? As herself, Daniel cut her off. Under my protection, yes, but making her own way. She works, she learns, she chooses her path. An older man joined them, his hair streaked with silver, wearing a mixture of traditional clothing and trader's goods. His face was weathered but kind as he studied Margaret. I am Standing Bear, he said, Daniel's uncle. You are welcome at our fire. Margaret Sullivan. The simple kindness in his voice nearly undid her. Margaret managed a quiet thank you that seemed to satisfy him. Come, Mary said, her tone grudging. If she stays, she must be presented to Grandmother Moon Rising. Little Wolf, take the horses. Margaret dismounted on shaking legs, following Daniel and Mary through the camp. Eyes tracked their every movement. She heard whispers in Comanche, caught the word white in English several times. Children peered at her from behind their mother's skirts, and she tried to smile at them, though her face felt frozen. The lodge they approached was smaller than the others, but somehow seemed more significant. The buffalo hide covering was painted with moons in various phases, and the entrance flap was decorated with bells that chimed softly in the wind. Wait here, Mary commanded, disappearing inside. Margaret stood awkwardly beside Daniel, acutely aware of her travel-stained dress, her tangled hair, her general state of disarray. I look terrible, she whispered. You look like someone who has traveled hard. Daniel replied, This is not bad thing. Mary emerged and held the flap open. She will see you, both of you. The interior was dim, fragrant with sage and sweetgrass. As Margaret's eyes adjusted, she saw an ancient woman seated on a pile of furs. Grandmother Moon Rising was tiny, her face a map of wrinkles, but her eyes were sharp as obsidian blades. She spoke in Comanche, her voice like dry leaves rustling. Daniel translated. She asks why you come to our people. Margaret hesitated, then decided on truth. Because staying where I was meant dying slowly. Because you're Neff, because Daniel offered me choice when no one else would. Because I want to know who I can become when I'm not treated as worthless. The old woman studied her for a long moment after Daniel translated. Then she spoke again. Longer this time. She says you speak honest words, but words are wind. Actions show truth. You will be tested. Some will reject you. Some will test you. Some will help. This has always been the way when worlds meet. She says, Daniel paused, seeming surprised. She says she sees a small flame in you, trying not to die. We shall see if it grows or if wind puts it out. Grandmother Moon Rising raised a gnarled hand in clear dismissal. Outside. Mary waited with crossed arms. You stay in my lodge tonight, she announced, making it sound like both sentence and challenge. Tomorrow, we see about making proper space. You cannot stay with Daniel. People would talk. I understand, Margaret said, though she felt a flash of panic at being separated from the one person she knew. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Mary put her to work immediately, hauling water from the stream, grinding corn, scraping a hide stretched on a frame. The work was hard but familiar in its purpose. Other women came to watch, some offering advice, others simply staring. One younger woman, perhaps Margaret's age, finally approached with a tentative smile. I am Singing Bird, she said in careful English. You are the woman from the town. Yes. Is it true what they say, that the white men tried to sell you? Margaret's cheeks burned. Yes. Singing Bird's eyes widened. And Daniel bought you like horse? To save me from worse, Margaret clarified quickly. He's given me choice. Daniel is good man. Singing Bird interrupted. Sad since Sarah Flying Cloud died. Little Wolf needs mother, but Daniel... She shrugged. He loves ghosts too much to see living woman. Until now. Maybe... It's not like that, Margaret protested. He doesn't... I'm not... Singing Bird laughed, a bright sound like water over stones. Maybe, maybe not. Time shows truth. Come, I teach you better way to scrape hide. Mary Elk dancing is testing you, but she means well. She was Sarah's close friend. She protects her memory. As the sun began to set, Margaret's arms ached and her back screamed. But she'd managed to complete every task Mary set. She'd also learned basic words: water, fire, food. Thank you. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. The evening meal was communal, the band gathering around a central fire. Margaret sat with Mary's family, painfully aware of her outsider status but grateful not to be completely shunned. The food was different, a stew of meat and wild roots, flatbread cooked on hot stones, dried berries mixed with fat. It was actually more filling than many meals she'd had in Bitter Creek. Daniel sat across the fire with Little Wolf and Standing Bear. He caught her eye once, giving a small nod that she took as approval or encouragement. Little Wolf was chattering animatedly to another boy, seemingly carefree in a way she hadn't seen before. He's different here, she murmured to Mary. This is his world, Mary replied. You are the stranger here, not him. Remember that. After the meal, an elderly man began telling a story in Comanche. Children gathered close, their faces wrapped in the firelight. Margaret couldn't understand the words, but the storyteller's voice rose and fell like music, his hands painting pictures in the air. He tells of the first horses, Singing Bird whispered, having appeared at Margaret's side. How they came from the south with the Spanish. How our people learned to ride like wind. Before horses, we were different people. After, we became lords of the plains. Margaret watched the faces around the fire, old and young, warriors and children, all united in the ancient rhythm of story. For a moment, she felt the deep roots of this community. the bonds that held them together against a world increasingly hostile to their existence. When the story ended, people began dispersing to their lodges. Mary led Margaret to a buffalo robe near the back of her dwelling. "You sleep here. Tomorrow, you learn to ride properly. Also to shoot. A woman alone on the plains without skills is dead woman." "Thank you," Margaret said, meaning it, despite her gruffness. Mary had shown her more practical kindness than she'd received from most people in Bitter Creek. "Don't thank yet," Mary warned. "Tomorrow will be harder, and the day after, harder still. Some will try to drive you away with cruelty. Others will test your resolve. You must decide each day to stay or go. No one else can make that choice." As Margaret lay on the buffalo robe, far softer than her thin mattress in the saloon, she thought about choices. A week ago, her only choice had been which floor to scrub first. Now, an entire world of possibilities, terrifying and exhilarating, spread before her. Outside, she could hear the sounds of the camp settling for the night. Dogs barking, horses nickering, a baby crying before being soothed. Normal sounds of life, yet completely foreign to her experience. A shadow passed by the lodge entrance, and she heard Daniel's voice speaking quietly to Mary in Comanche. Mary responded, her tone softer than it had been all day. Margaret caught her own name and wondered what they discussed. She thought of Tom, wondered what he would think of her now. Proper, gentle Tom, who had wanted nothing more than a quiet life and a house full of children. Would he be horrified, proud, unable to recognize the woman she was becoming? The thought that she was becoming someone new, rather than simply enduring, was novel. In Bitter Creek, she had been the widow Sullivan, object of pity and eventually scorn. Here, she was Margaret, who must prove herself, who must learn and adapt, and choose her path each day.
It was terrifying. It was exhausting.
It was also, she realized with surprise,
Exhilarating.
tomorrow would bring new challenges. She would ache in new places, fail at new tasks, face new tests. But she would also learn, and perhaps in learning, she would discover who Margaret Sullivan could be when freed from the narrow constraints of proper society. As sleep finally took her, she heard the distant howl of wolves and felt, for the first time, kinship with their wild freedom rather than fear of their strangeness. The morning came too soon, announced by Mary Elk Dancing's firm shake of Margaret's shoulder. "Up, we move today." Margaret sat up, disoriented.
Move where?
"Winter camp. The scouts report bluecoats 2 days south. We go north, find better shelter before the hard snows." The next hours were a revelation in organized chaos. The entire camp transformed with practiced efficiency. Women dismantled lodges with swift precision, rolling buffalo hides and packing belongings onto travois. Children corralled dogs and gathered scattered items. Men prepared horses and stood guard at the camp's perimeter. "Don't stand like tree," Mary barked at Margaret. "Work." Margaret threw herself into the activity, trying to imitate the other women's movements. Her attempts to roll the heavy lodge covering resulted in a tangled mess that Singing Bird kindly helped her fix. "Like this," Singing Bird demonstrated, her movements economical and smooth. "Everything has order. Poles first, then covering, then household goods, each thing in its place so we can rebuild quickly." By the time the sun was fully up, the entire camp had vanished as if it had never been. Only flattened grass and cold fire pits marked where a community had lived. Margaret stared in amazement at the transformation. 20 lodges, maybe 100 people, gone like morning mist. Standing Bear commented, appearing at her elbow. "This is how we survive. Move like wind, leave little trace." Daniel approached leading her mare. "You ride better today. Mary says she teaches you, but first, this." He handed her a bundle riding clothes, more practical than her worn dress. The deerskin skirt was divided for riding, the blouse simple but warm. Margaret felt her cheeks burn. I can't wear." "You can die of foolish modesty or live in proper clothes," Mary interrupted. "Choose quick. We leave soon." Margaret ducked behind a travois to change, her fingers fumbling with unfamiliar fastenings. The clothes felt strange, but liberating. No corset, no layers of petticoats, just soft leather that moved with her body. When she emerged, several women nodded approval. "Better," Mary declared. "Now maybe you don't fall off horse so much." The procession that formed was impressive. Warriors ranged ahead and to the sides, women and children in the center with the travois, elderly riding or walking as they chose. The horse herd moved like a river alongside them, controlled by boys who rode as if born to it. Margaret's place was with Mary's group, still clearly an outsider, but no longer completely separate. Her mare was steady, and she found the new clothing made riding much easier. Still, after an hour, her body protested the constant motion. "Sit deeper," a voice said beside her. She turned to find Daniel riding alongside, Little Wolf on his other side. "Move with horse, not against, like dancing." "I never learned to dance well either," Margaret admitted. Something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. "Then learn both together," he demonstrated, his body flowing with his horse's movement like water. Margaret tried to imitate him, felt the difference when she stopped fighting the motion. "Better," he said. "Practice this. By winter camp, you ride like you were born to it." Little Wolf had been watching silently. Now he spoke, surprising Margaret. "My mother couldn't ride when she first came to us. She learned, won races later." It was the first time the boy had spoken to her directly, the first mention of his mother that wasn't filtered through someone else. Margaret felt the weight of the comparison, but also the tentative offering in it. "What else did she have to learn?" Margaret asked carefully. Little Wolf considered. "Everything. Shooting, making pemmican, beading, telling winter stories. She said hardest was learning when to be silent and when to speak. White women talk too much," she said. "Little Wolf," Daniel warned softly. "It's true Mother said so. Said she had to learn the value of quiet, of listening. Said it made her stronger." Margaret pondered this as they rode. In Bitter Creek, women's voices had filled the air with gossip, complaints, constant chatter. Here, she noticed, the women spoke with purpose, instructions, necessary information, laughter that meant something. Even their silence felt different, comfortable rather than oppressive. The sun climbed higher, and the pace never slackened. When Margaret's water ran low, Singing Bird showed her how to ration it. When her back ached unbearably, an elderly woman named White Dove offered her a root to chew that numbed the pain slightly. "You do well for first time," White Dove said in broken English. "Many white women cry, complain, give up. You, quiet and learning. This is good." During the midday break to water horses, Margaret found herself assigned to help with the children. They regarded her with curious eyes, some bold enough to touch her light hair. One little girl, perhaps 5 years old, approached with a grasshopper cupped in her hands, offering it like a gift. She asks if white women eat grasshoppers. Singing Bird translated, laughing at Margaret's expression. "Tell her no, but thank her for kindness." Margaret managed the Comanche words for thank you, which delighted the child. Soon she had a small following of children teaching her words horse, sky, water, sun. Their laughter when she mispronounced things was infectious rather than cruel. "See," Singing Bird said, "children accept easier. Adults carry too much fear, too much anger, but children see only new person to teach, to play with." When they resumed traveling, the landscape had changed. Hills gave way to a river valley, the water running clear and cold. Daniel rode back from scouting to confer with the elder men, and Margaret caught the tension in their voices. "What's wrong?" she asked Mary. "Tracks, shot horses, many of them. Could be soldiers, could be buffalo hunters. Either way, trouble." The mood of the group shifted. Women hushed children. Warriors spread out wider. weapons at ready. Margaret felt her heart rate quicken as she realized how vulnerable they were, a moving village with elderly and children, not a war party. They pushed harder, reaching a defensible campsite as shadows grew long. The lodges went up with even greater efficiency, but in a tighter circle, guards were posted, and weapons were kept close. Margaret helped where she could, her fumbling attempts gradually becoming more confident. When Mary sent her to gather firewood, she knew to look for dry branches that would burn with little smoke. When asked to help with the evening meal, she could now grind corn without spilling half of it. As darkness fell, Daniel appeared at Mary's lodge. "I need to speak with Margaret," he said formally. "Outside, away from others' ears," he said. "Tomorrow might bring danger. If soldiers come, or if hunters attack, you must be ready." "I don't understand. Why would they attack? We're just traveling." "We exist. That is enough reason for some." His voice was bitter. "They want land empty of us, want buffalo for themselves, want gold they think we hide. Always reasons to attack Indians." He handed her something, a small pistol, well maintained. "Can you shoot?" "Tom taught me a little. Snakes, mostly." "Good. Keep this close. If fighting comes, stay with the women and children in center. Shoot only if someone gets through warriors. Aim for chest, not head. Easier target." Margaret took the weapon, its weight both reassuring and terrifying. "Why are you telling me this? Why arm me?" "Because you chose to stay. That makes you one of us, even if others don't see yet. We protect our own." The simple declaration hit her harder than any flowery speech could have. She blinked back unexpected tears. "Thank you." "Also," Daniel continued more quietly, "if worst happens, save one bullet, better than capture for woman, white or Indian." The grim reality of their situation crashed over her. In town, the worst she'd faced was humiliation and servitude. Here, the stakes were life and death, freedom or captivity of a different sort. "I understand," she said, though her voice shook. Daniel studied her in the dim light. "You regret coming." Margaret thought of Morrison's leering face, of being sold like livestock, of the slow death of her spirit in that place. Then she thought of the children teaching her words, of Singing Bird's friendship, of the old woman offering her pain-relieving root. "No," she said firmly. "Whatever happens, no." Something shifted in Daniel's expression. "Sarah said same. First time I warned her of danger. Said facing death as free woman better than living as slave." He turned to go, then paused. "Little Wolf spoke to you today. First time since his mother died he speaks of her to outsider. You have gift with children, is good thing." Left alone, Margaret tucked the pistol into her belt, hidden but accessible. The camp was quieter than usual, tension thrumming beneath the surface. She helped serve the evening meal, noticed how the men ate in shifts, always some on guard. Later, in Mary's lodge, she lay awake listening to the night sounds. Every snap of a twig, every animal call made her tense. Mary noticed her restlessness. "First time is hardest," the older woman said quietly. "Fear of unknown worse than real danger. Sleep, tomorrow needs strength." "How do you stand it always moving, always threatened?" Mary was quiet so long Margaret thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "Because this is life. Your people, they build towns, walls. Try to keep danger out. We know danger is part of world, like storm or winter. We don't hide from it. We flow around it, through it, like water." "Weren't you ever afraid?" "Every day, fear keeps you sharp, alive. But fear doesn't rule. We rule fear, make it serve us." Mary rolled over, ending the conversation. "Now sleep. Dawn comes whether we rest or not." Margaret closed her eyes, one hand resting on the hidden pistol. Tomorrow would bring what it brought. But tonight, she was part of something, even if that something was fragile and threatened. She'd chosen this, chosen to cast her lot with people who saw her as more than trash to be discarded. Whatever came with the dawn, she would meet it as Margaret Sullivan, not the broken widow of Bitter Creek, but whoever she was becoming in this vast, dangerous, strangely liberating world. The news arrived with the morning Scouts riders from Bitter Creek were 2 hours behind them, led by Morrison himself. Margaret's blood turned cold when Standing Bear delivered the message to the gathered council. "How many?" Daniel asked. 15, maybe 20 men. They claimed the white woman was kidnapped. Demand her return." The camp erupted in heated discussion. Some warriors wanted to fight. Others counseled avoidance. The women gathered their children closer, memories of past attacks fresh in their minds. Margaret stood frozen until Mary grabbed her arm. "Come, you must speak to the council." "I can't." "You must. Your words decide if we fight or not." The council of elders had gathered in the central area. Grandmother Moon Rising sat wrapped in her blanket, her ancient eyes watching Margaret approach. The men's faces ranged from sympathetic to hostile. "Speak," Standing Bear commanded. "Tell us truth. Were you taken against your will?" Margaret's voice shook, but carried clearly. "No, I was being sold in Morrison's saloon like property. Daniel paid the price they asked. I chose to leave with him." "They will not believe this." One warrior, Spotted Eagle, said harshly, "White men never believe their women choose to leave them." "Then what do you suggest?" Daniel's voice was dangerously quiet. "Give her to them. Let them take her back to be sold again." "To protect the band," Spotted Eagle began. "To protect the band, we stand for what is right." Grandmother Moon Rising interrupted, her voice cutting through the argument like a blade. "The woman made her choice. We do not give back those who seek sanctuary at our fires." "But the cost." "There is always cost." The old woman said, "Cost of fighting, cost of running, cost of surrendering piece by piece who we are. Which cost can you bear to pay?" The debate raged on. Margaret felt the weight of their potential losses crushing her chest. These people who had begun to accept her might die because of her presence. "I'll go back," she said suddenly. The words fell into a momentary silence. "I won't have blood spilled because of me." "No." Daniel's response was immediate and firm. "You made your choice. We made ours when we accepted you." "But—" "Would you ask us to be less than the white men?" Singing Bird demanded, surprising everyone with her vehemence. "They would die to keep their women from us. Should we do less to protect those under our care?" Little Wolf pushed through the crowd to stand before Margaret. His young face was set with determination. "You don't go back. You're learning to be like Mother was. We don't give family to bad men." The simple declaration from the child seemed to settle something in the group. Grandmother Moon Rising raised her hand. "It is decided. We do not surrender the woman. But neither do we seek unnecessary bloodshed. Standing Bear, take warriors to meet them. Tell them the truth. If they insist on violence," she shrugged eloquently. The camp exploded into action. Warriors painted themselves for potential battle. Women prepared bandages and weapons. Children and elders made ready to flee if needed. Margaret found herself swept into Mary's efficient preparations. "If fighting comes, you take the young children to the river caves. Singing Bird knows the way." "But I should." "You should do what helps most. Dead white woman starts war. Live white woman protecting children shows we are not savages they claim." Margaret nodded, understanding the harsh logic. She gathered the designated children, trying to project calm she didn't feel. The little girl who had offered her a grasshopper clung to her skirt. "Are the bad men coming?" the child asked in Comanche. Margaret had learned enough to understand. "Perhaps, but we are ready," she replied in broken Comanche, which seemed to reassure the girl. An hour passed, then another. The camp waited in tense silence, everyone straining to hear approaching horses or gunfire. Finally, a rider appeared, one of their own scouts. "They come." The white men rejected words of peace. They demand to see the woman themselves. Daniel appeared at Margaret's side. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do." Margaret straightened her shoulders. "If seeing me might prevent bloodshed, then they'll see me." The confrontation took place at the edge of camp. Morrison rode at the head of his group, his face red with drink and fury despite the early hour. Jake Hutchkins was there too, along with others from town she recognized. They looked out of place here, their town clothes dusty and torn from hard riding. "Margaret," Morrison called out. "Thank God we've found you. Come here. You're safe now." Margaret stepped forward, flanked by Daniel and Standing Bear. She kept her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'm not in danger. Mr. Morrison, I chose to leave." "Don't be ridiculous," Morrison sneered. "These savages have confused you, threatened you. Come here now, and we'll sort this out back in town." "Like you sorted out selling me in your saloon." Morrison's face darkened. "That was business. This is kidnapping. Boys, get ready to take her." The Comanche warriors raised their weapons. Morrison's men did the same. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. "You want to die for pride?" Standing Bear asked calmly. "Look around. Count our numbers. You are 20 tired men far from help. We are many, and this is our land." "She's a white woman. She belongs with her own kind." "I belong where I choose," Margaret said, stepping fully forward. "And I choose here. I was nothing but property to you, something to be sold to pay debts. Here, I work honestly. Here, I'm treated with respect. Here, I matter." "You're living with savages," Hutchkins snarled. "Probably warming that redskin's bed." Daniel moved so fast, Margaret barely saw it. His knife was at Hutchkins's throat before anyone could react. "Speak such filth again, and you'll speak no more." "Stop," Margaret commanded. "This is what they want, an excuse for violence." She looked directly at Morrison. "Go back to Bitter Creek. Tell them I'm dead if you must. Tell them I was eaten by wolves or drowned in a river. I don't care, but I'm not returning." "You're making a mistake," Morrison said. But she could see defeat in his eyes. He'd counted on her being a helpless captive, not a woman standing firm in her choice. "The only mistake I made was staying in your town as long as I did after Tom died." She pulled the small pistol Daniel had given her, showing it to them. "I'm armed. I'm capable. I'm choosing my life. Accept it and leave. Or stay and bleed for nothing. Choose." The standoff stretched taut. Then one of Morrison's men spoke up, Big Pete Coleman, who had bid on her that day. "Maybe she's right. Morrison, maybe we should go." "You spineless." "Look around," Pete gestured at the armed camp. "She ain't asking for rescue. We came all this way for nothing. I'm not dying for your wounded pride." Others began to mutter agreement. Morrison's authority, built on bluster and greed, crumbled in the face of real danger. "This isn't over." He spat at Margaret. "You've turned your back on civilization. When these animals tire of you, don't come crawling back." "If I do return," Margaret said quietly, "it won't be to crawl. It will be to visit my husband's grave as a free woman, something I never was in your town." Morrison wheeled his horse around violently. "Come on, boys! Let the whore rot with her red devils!" They rode away in a cloud of dust and curses. The camp remained alert until scouts confirmed they were truly leaving, heading back toward Bitter Creek. As tension eased, Margaret found herself surrounded. Warriors nodded respect. Women touched her shoulder in solidarity. Grandmother Moon Rising beckoned her close. "You spoke well," the old woman said through Standing Bear's translation. "Words of truth have power. You shamed them with their own cruelty." "I was terrified," Margaret admitted. "Good. Courage is not absence of fear. Courage is acting despite fear. Today you were warrior with words instead of weapons. This is also strength." That night, the camp celebrated their bloodless victory. The story was told and retold, growing with each telling. Margaret found herself the center of attention she neither sought nor entirely wanted. "You stood like mountain," one warrior said approvingly. "Didn't weep or beg? Good. Should have let me cut the ugly one," another added, referring to Hutchkins. His words deserved blood. Daniel sat across the fire from her. Little Wolf pressed against his side. Their eyes met over the flames, and he raised his cup slightly in a private salute. She'd passed another test, proven herself in a way that mattered to these people. Later, Mary helped her prepare for bed. The older woman was unusually quiet until Margaret asked, "What troubles you?" "You did well today, showed strength, but Morrison's words will spread. Other white men will come, maybe soldiers. Today bought time, not peace." "Then what do I do?" Mary studied her carefully. "Learn faster, shoot straighter, ride harder, become one of us in truth, not just in words. Then maybe, when harder times come, you survive them." Margaret nodded, understanding. Today's victory was just one step on a longer journey, but it was an important step. She'd publicly chosen this life, burned her bridges to the old one. There was no going back now. As she lay down to sleep, she heard Little Wolf's voice carrying from Daniel's lodge, excitedly retelling the confrontation to other children. In his version, Margaret was already becoming legend, the white woman who chose the people over her own kind, who faced down 20 men with words sharp as arrows. It wasn't quite true, but Margaret understood that stories shaped reality as much as facts did. Tonight, she'd become part of their story, woven into the narrative of the band, and they'd become part of hers, no longer strangers she lived among, but people worth standing for. The fire burned low, casting dancing shadows on the lodge walls. Outside, guards kept watch as they always did, but inside the circle of lodges, there was warmth and acceptance and something that might even be called home. Margaret closed her eyes, one hand still resting on the pistol she hoped never to use. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, Mary had made that clear. But tonight, she'd chosen her path with words witnessed by all. She was no longer Margaret Sullivan, widow of Bitter Creek, sold like trash. She was Margaret who stood with the people, who spoke truth to power, who was learning to live like fire, dangerous and warming in equal measure. The transformation wasn't complete. Perhaps it never would be. But it had begun in earnest, and there was no turning back now. The fever came 3 days after Morrison's departure, striking Margaret like a physical blow. One moment she was helping Singing Bird prepare hides. The next she was on her knees, the world spinning violently around her. "Margaret," Singing Bird's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Help someone help." Hands lifted her, carried her. She was vaguely aware of being placed on soft furs, of worried voices speaking in rapid Comanche. Hot and cold washed over her in waves, and her thoughts scattered like leaves in a storm. "Too much change too fast," she heard Mary say. "White people bodies not strong for our life sometimes." Daniel's voice, tight with concern, the same fever that took Sarah. "No, different. This is exhaustion fever, body fighting itself, but still dangerous." Margaret drifted in and out of consciousness, in her delirium. She was back in Morrison's saloon, except the men bidding on her had skull faces and spoke in tongues. Morrison laughed and laughed, the sound echoing like thunder. "Not worth even 30 pieces of silver," he sneered. "Trash, just trash to be thrown away." She tried to protest, but her voice wouldn't work. The saloon floor opened beneath her, and she fell into darkness where Tom waited, his face gray with death. "You forgot me so quickly," he accused. "Running off with savages. What would your mother think?" "I didn't forget," she tried to say. "I just couldn't die with you." The visions shifted. She stood in an empty lodge, surrounded by Comanche who pointed and laughed. "White woman playing Indian," they chanted. "Doesn't belong anywhere." Through it all, She sensed real presences, cool hands on her burning forehead, liquid held to her lips, voices speaking words she couldn't understand but which sounded like prayers or promises. Once, she surfaced enough to see Daniel sitting beside her, his face drawn with exhaustion. He was applying a cool cloth to her neck, his movements gentle. "Don't die," he said quietly. "Little Wolf already lost one mother. Don't make him lose another." She wanted to tell him she wasn't Little Wolf's mother, wasn't trying to replace Sarah, but the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she whispered, "Not trash, not trash anymore." "No," he agreed firmly. "Never trash. You are fire. Fire doesn't die easily. Fight, Margaret, fight!" She sank back into the fever dreams, but his words followed her down. Fire. She was supposed to be fire, but fire needed fuel, needed air, needed tending, or it died. Was she strong enough to keep burning? In her delirium, Sarah Flying Cloud appeared not as Daniel had described her, but glowing with ethereal light. The ghostly woman studied Margaret with eyes that held both kindness and challenge.
"So you're the one trying to fill my moccasins," Sarah said.
"I'm not trying to replace you," Margaret protested. "No. Then what are you doing with my husband and son?" "Surviving, learning, trying to become something, I don't know what yet." Sarah's expression softened. "Good answer. I wasn't trying to replace anyone either when I came to the people. I was just trying to live. The rest happened as it would." "Do they compare me to you?" "Every day. It's not fair. But fairness isn't something either of our peoples excel at." Sarah moved closer, her form wavering like heat shimmer. "Listen, white woman who would be Comanche, the fever will break. You'll survive, but survival isn't enough. You must choose, truly choose. Half measures will kill you surer than any fever." "Choose what?" "Choose who you are becoming. Not Tom's widow, not Morrison's victim, not my shadow. Who is Margaret when she strips all that away?" The vision faded, leaving Margaret alone in a vast prairie of fever dreams. She wandered there for what felt like days, confronting fears and hopes she'd buried. Her mother appeared, tight-lipped with disapproval. Her father, dead these 10 years, shook his head sadly. Neighbors from Bitter Creek pointed and whispered. But gradually, other voices grew stronger. Little Wolf calling her name, singing birds singing a soft lullaby, Mary's gruff encouragements, Standing Bear's steady presence. These new voices began to drown out the old ghosts. When Margaret finally woke properly, weak but clear-headed, the first thing she saw was Little Wolf's worried face peering at her from the lodge entrance. "Father, she's awake." Daniel appeared moments later, relief visible in every line of his body. 3 days, he said simply. "You fought hard."
"Did I say anything?"
Margaret asked, mortified at what fever truths might have spilled from her lips. "Many things, some in English, some in attempts at Comanche that made no sense." A slight smile tugged at his mouth. "You argued with ghosts. Told someone named Morrison he was a well. Words I didn't know white ladies knew." Despite her weakness, Margaret laughed. It hurt, but it felt clean, like rain after drought. Grandmother Moon Rising entered, moving slowly but purposefully. She placed a gnarled hand on Margaret's forehead, then nodded satisfaction. "The fever burned away some of what held you to the old world." Standing Bear translated, "This is painful but necessary. Like snake shedding skin, you cannot become new while wearing the old." Over the following days, Margaret recovered slowly. The band had delayed moving to winter camp because of her illness, a kindness that humbled her. She tried to protest, but Mary shut her down firmly. "We don't abandon our people. You stood for us against the white men. We stand for you against sickness." As she regained strength, Margaret noticed changes in how others treated her. The fever had been a trial by fire, and surviving it seemed to have shifted her status. Women who had kept their distance now stopped to check on her. Warriors nodded acknowledgement when she passed. One evening, as she sat by the fire, still too weak to work, Little Wolf brought her a small carved horse. "I made it," he said shyly, "while you were sick, so you'd have something nice to wake up to." Margaret's throat tightened. "It's beautiful. Thank you." The boy hesitated, then asked, "When Mother was sick, I made her a bird. She kept it until—" He trailed off. "I'll keep this always," Margaret promised. "It will remind me of your kindness when I needed it most." Little Wolf smiled a real smile that transformed his serious face. "Father says you're strong, says you have the spirit of a warrior even if you don't fight with weapons." "Your father is kind." "No," Little Wolf said matter-of-factly. "Father is honest. He doesn't say things unless they're true." That night, Daniel joined her by the fire after Little Wolf had gone to bed. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the flames dance. "Thank you," Margaret said finally, "for caring for me, for—" She gestured helplessly. "Everything? You would do the same. Have done the same for others already." He poked at the fire with a stick. "Little Wolf likes you. He's a good boy. You've raised him well. His mother raised him. I just try not to undo her work." The familiar pain flickered across his face when speaking of Sarah. "He needs stability, someone who stays—" Margaret heard the unspoken question in his words. "I'm not going anywhere. Daniel, I proved that when Morrison came. And the fever proved I'm too stubborn to die easily." "Stubbornness is a good trait for this life," he agreed. "But Margaret, you know what people will think. What they already whisper. White woman, Comanche man, boy who needs mother." "I know." She took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "When I was burning with fever, I saw many things, some false, some true. One truth I saw: I've been so afraid of replacing Sarah that I haven't let myself just be Margaret. But I'm not trying to fill her place. I'm trying to make my own." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah would like you. I think you both have iron underneath the softness. Both chose hard path when easier ones existed." "Tell me about her. Not the saint everyone makes her sound like, but the real woman." A genuine smile crossed Daniel's face. "She had terrible temper. Threw cooking pot at me once when I tracked mud into Clean Lodge. Couldn't sing, sounded like crow with sore throat, but tried anyway, made children laugh. Was terrified of snakes but pretended bravery so Little Wolf wouldn't learn fear." As he spoke, Sarah became real, not a perfect ghost to compete with, but a complex woman who had struggled and adapted just as Margaret was doing. "She wasn't born to this life any more than you," Daniel continued. "But she chose it every day, even when it was hard, even when other whites called her traitor and some Comanche called her outsider. She chose. And you chose her. Yes, not at first. She was just a frightened child when she came to us. But later, when she had grown strong, when she could have left but stayed. Yes, I chose her as she chose us." The fire crackled between them, sending sparks into the star-filled sky. Margaret felt something shift, like ice breaking on a frozen river. The space between them was still there, but no longer insurmountable. "I need time," she said softly, "to finish becoming whoever I'm becoming, to know I'm choosing for the right reasons, not just gratitude or loneliness." "Time we have," Daniel replied. "I waited 3 years for Sarah to see me as more than protector. I can wait for you to see yourself clearly." He rose to leave, then paused. "You are not trash. Margaret Sullivan. Never were, but now you begin to know it too. This is good thing." After he left, Margaret sat alone by the dying fire, fingering the carved horse Little Wolf had made. She thought of Tom, but the guilt that usually accompanied his memory had faded. He would want her happy, alive, valued. He wouldn't understand this choice, but he would understand choosing life over slow death. The stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had watched over her in Bitter Creek, but somehow brighter here. Tomorrow she would be strong enough to resume learning, to continue her transformation from town widow to whatever she was becoming. But tonight, she was simply Margaret, sick and recovering, scared but determined, surrounded by people who had proven they valued her enough to fight for her, to care for her, to wait for her to heal and grow. It was more than she'd ever had in the life she'd left behind. And it was, she realized with a kind of wonder, enough foundation to build something new and strong and entirely her own. The carved horse caught the last light of the fire, and Margaret smiled. Not trash, not a shadow, not yet fully formed into whoever she would become. But definitely, certainly, finally not alone. Dawn came with gunfire and screaming horses. Margaret jolted awake to chaos, warriors shouting, women grabbing children, the thunder of hooves. Through the lodge entrance, she saw riders charging through camp, firing wildly.
Morrison,
Mary hissed, throwing Margaret the pistol.
he brought more men.
Margaret's hands moved without thought, checking the weapon, pulling on her boots. Outside, the camp had erupted into battle. Comanche warriors fought desperately to repel attackers who had struck with the advantage of surprise.
The children,
Singing birds screamed, and Margaret saw several young ones frozen in terror near the horse herd. Without thinking, Margaret ran. Bullets whined past her head as she reached the first child, scooping him up. "Run!" she shouted in Comanche to the others. "To the river caves!" She heard a familiar voice roaring drunk commands Jake Hutchkins, leading a group toward the lodges. Her blood turned to ice as she recognized his intent. They weren't here just for her. They meant to destroy everything. "Take them!" Margaret thrust the child at Singing Bird, then turned back. She couldn't let these men hurt the people who'd taken her in. The battle raged in pockets throughout the camp. She saw Daniel fighting 3 men at once, his knife flashing. Standing Bear rallied warriors despite blood streaming from his shoulder. But there were too many attackers, and surprise had given them a terrible advantage. Margaret spotted Little Wolf trapped between 2 horses, Hutchkins advancing on him with a rifle. The boy's eyes were wide with terror. "No!" The word tore from her throat as she raised her pistol. Time slowed. She saw Hutchkins turn toward her voice, saw his ugly grin of recognition, saw him swing his rifle toward Little Wolf anyway. Margaret fired. The shot took Hutchkins in the chest. He staggered, surprise replacing cruelty on his face, then crumpled. Margaret felt nothing but savage satisfaction as she ran to Little Wolf.
"Are you hurt?"
The boy shook his head, staring at her with something like awe.
"You shot him. You saved me."
"Come on." She grabbed his hand, pulling him toward better cover. Around them, the tide of battle was turning. The initial shock had worn off, and Comanche warriors were rallying with deadly efficiency. Morrison appeared through the smoke on horseback, his face twisted with rage.
"There's the whore, get her."
2 men spurred toward them. Margaret pushed Little Wolf behind her, raising her pistol again, but she'd lost count of her shots. How many bullets left? An arrow sprouted from one attacker's shoulder. Daniel materialized from the smoke like an avenging spirit, pulling the second man from his horse with brutal efficiency. Margaret down. She dropped, covering Little Wolf with her body as bullets sparked off the rocks around them. When she looked up, Daniel was standing over them, blood running from a gash on his arm, but still fighting. The remaining attackers were falling back. Their easy victory turned into a costly mistake. Margaret heard Morrison screaming for retreat, his voice high with fear and fury. As quickly as it had begun, the attack ended. The surviving raiders fled, leaving their dead and wounded behind. The camp fell into an eerie quiet, broken only by moans of pain and crying children. "Little Wolf," Daniel dropped beside them, hands checking his son for injuries.
"I'm not hurt,"
the boy said, then pointed at Margaret. "She saved me, shot the bad man who tried to kill me. Daniel's eyes met Margaret's over his son's head. Something profound passed between them: gratitude, respect, and something deeper. "Check the wounded," he said gruffly. "I must help pursue. Make sure they don't return." As warriors rode out after the fleeing attackers, Margaret joined the women tending injuries. Her hands, steady during the fight, now shook as the reality hit her. She had killed a man, shot him without hesitation to save Little Wolf. "You did well," Mary said, appearing at her elbow. "Quick thinking, brave action, like a true warrior woman." "I killed Jake Hutchkins." "Yes, and he would have killed Little Wolf. Then this was justice, not murder." Margaret worked mechanically, bandaging wounds, comforting children. The little girl who had given her a grasshopper clung to her skirts, and Margaret lifted her, murmuring soothing words in broken Comanche. The final toll was harsh: 3 warriors dead, 7 wounded, 1 woman killed protecting her baby. The attackers had lost 8 men, including Hutchkins, with several more wounded left behind. "We were lucky," Standing Bear said grimly, his shoulder now properly bandaged. "If they had been soldiers, trained fighters instead of town-drunk rabble, would be much worse." As the sun climbed higher, the pursuit party returned. Daniel reported that Morrison and the survivors had scattered, riding hard for Bitter Creek. "They won't come back," he said with certainty. "Too many dead, and Morrison is coward. He will spin lies about savage attacks, but he won't risk his own neck again." The camp prepared to move immediately. The location was compromised, and they needed to put distance between themselves and any potential retaliation. As Margaret helped pack Mary's lodge, she noticed people looking at her differently, not with suspicion or tolerance, but with genuine respect. "Margaret standing strong," one warrior called as he passed. "Good shooting." "She is protector of children now," an elder woman added. "Faced men with guns to save little ones. This is honored thing." When they stopped to rest at midday, far from the morning's battlefield, Grandmother Moon Rising summoned Margaret. "You have been tested by fire twice now," the old woman said through Standing Bear. "Once by fever, once by battle. Both times you chose to protect rather than flee. The people see you now not as white woman among us, but as Margaret who stands with us." "I only did what anyone would." "No," Grandmother interrupted. "You did what warrior does, what mother does, what person of courage does. Many would have hidden, run, saved only themselves. You ran toward danger for child not your own. This matters." That evening, in their new camp, Daniel found Margaret sitting alone by the river. She was cleaning her pistol, trying not to think about Hutchkins's face when the bullet struck. "You saved my son," he said simply. "I owe you debt beyond words." "You owe me nothing, Little Wolf." She paused, struggling for words. "He matters to me. I couldn't let anyone hurt him." "He wishes to speak with you, has something important to say." Little Wolf approached shyly, very different from the terrified child of the morning. He stood straight, speaking carefully in English. "Margaret Sullivan, you fought for me today, killed an enemy to save my life. Among our people, this creates bond. If you willing, I would be proud to call you mother, not to replace my first mother, but as second mother who chose to love me." Margaret's vision blurred with tears. She looked at Daniel, who nodded encouragingly, then back at the earnest boy before her. "I would be honored to be your second mother, Little Wolf, if your father agrees." "I agree," Daniel said quietly. "Sarah told me once that children need all the love they can find in this hard world. She would be glad Little Wolf has someone willing to fight for him." Little Wolf threw his arms around Margaret, and she held him tight, feeling something broken inside her finally begin to heal. When he pulled back, he spoke again, this time in Comanche. "What did he say?" Margaret asked, wiping her eyes. "He said you are no longer Margaret who was sold. You are Margaret who protects, mother by choice, warrior by action." That night, the camp celebrated survival with subdued gratitude. The dead were mourned, the wounded tended, but life continued. Margaret found herself truly integrated for the first time, women sharing food without being asked, warriors nodding respect, children seeking her attention naturally. "You know this changes things," Mary said as they prepared for sleep. "You killed white man to save Comanche child. In eyes of your people, you are now enemy, can never go back to their world." "I know," Margaret replied, surprised by her own calm. "But I crossed that bridge when I stood with you against Morrison the first time. Today just burned it completely. And Daniel Little Wolf calling you mother means—" "I know what it means," Margaret said softly. "But that's tomorrow's challenge. Today, I'm just grateful we're alive, that Little Wolf is safe, that I was strong enough when it mattered." Mary studied her in the dim light. "You have changed, Margaret Sullivan. When you came, you were like rabbit frightened, ready to run. Now you show teeth like wolf. Is good change." As Margaret lay down to sleep, Little Wolf's carved horse in her hand, she thought about change. 6 months ago, she had been a proper widow in a terrible situation. Now she was a killer, a protector, a chosen mother, a woman between worlds who had picked her side definitively. The old Margaret would have been horrified, but the old Margaret had been dying slowly in Morrison's saloon, worth only what men would pay for her. This Margaret warrior, mother, member of the band was fully alive despite the blood on her hands. Or perhaps because of it. Sometimes, she realized, you had to fight to prove you deserved the life you'd chosen. Today, she had fought and won more than just a battle. She had won her place. The infection came fast and cruel. What had seemed like a simple gash on Daniel's arm from the battle turned angry and red within 2 days. By the 3rd day, he was burning with fever, delirious, calling for Sarah in the darkness. Margaret sat beside him, applying cool cloths to his burning skin, fighting her own rising panic. She'd seen infections kill strong men before, had watched it happen to a neighbor in Bitter Creek who'd cut himself on rusty wire. "The wound has gone bad," Mary said grimly. "See the red line spreading blood poisoning." "There must be something we can do," Margaret insisted. Grandmother Moon Rising examined Daniel with ancient hands, then spoke rapidly in Comanche. Standing Bear's translation was stark. "She says the white man's bullets sometimes carry evil medicine, makes wounds that won't heal. She will try her herbs, but—" The unfinished sentence hung heavy. Around them, the camp moved with subdued worry. Daniel was respected, vital to their band's survival, and everyone knew what his loss would mean for Little Wolf. The boy hadn't left his father's side except when Margaret physically carried him away to eat. His young face was drawn with fear, aged beyond his years. "Is father going to die like mother?" he asked Margaret with heartbreaking directness. "Not if I can help it," she replied fiercely. "Your father is strong. He'll fight." But as the hours passed, Daniel grew weaker. His skin burned to the touch, and the wound wept foul-smelling discharge despite their best efforts to keep it clean. He thrashed in his delirium, sometimes speaking Comanche, sometimes English, always returning to one name. "Sarah, Sarah, forgive me." "He thinks he failed her," Standing Bear explained quietly. "When she got sick, he rode 3 days to find white doctor. Doctor refused to come for Indian woman. Daniel has carried that guilt." Margaret felt her heart clench. She understood that guilt, the weight of being unable to save someone you loved. But she also felt a stab of something else. Would Daniel ever stop calling for his dead wife? Even if he lived, would there ever be room in his heart for anyone else? She pushed the selfish thought away. What mattered now was saving him, not her confused feelings. On the 4th night, Daniel's fever reached its peak. He convulsed, his body rigid with pain, and for terrifying moments, he stopped breathing. Margaret found herself praying not the formal prayers of her church-going days, but raw, desperate pleas to any power that might listen. "Please," she whispered, This man saved me. Let me save him. Little Wolf needs his father. The people need their warrior. I need... She couldn't finish that thought. Instead, she focused on practical action. The herbs weren't working. Traditional medicine was failing, but there was something else. Something she'd seen her grandmother do once for a festering wound. I need honey, she announced suddenly. Wild honey and salt and clean cloth boiled in water. Mary looked skeptical. Honey for wound. My grandmother was a healer in the old country. She used honey on bad wounds. Said it drew out the poison. Please, we have to try. Within an hour, they had gathered what she needed. Margaret cleaned the wound again, packed it with honey mixed with salt, and wrapped it in the boiled cloth. It was old knowledge, almost forgotten, but it was all she had. Now we wait, she said, taking up her vigil again. Little Wolf curled against her side. Will the honey help? I hope so. Sometimes old medicine is strongest. Through the long night, she kept watch. Daniel's fever seemed to plateau rather than spike higher. The wound still looked angry, but the spreading red lines had stopped advancing. When dawn came, he was still alive. Margaret. His voice was a whisper, but his eyes were clear for the first time in days. Don't try to talk. Save your strength. I'm a little wolf. Here, Father. The boy scrambled to his side. Margaret saved you. She used special medicine. Daniel's eyes found Margaret's. Not Sarah. No, she said gently. Sarah's gone. Daniel, I'm Margaret. You're safe. You're going to recover. Something shifted in his expression, recognition, perhaps even disappointment, but he squeezed Little Wolf's hand and managed a weak smile before drifting back to sleep. The crisis had passed, but recovery was slow. Margaret tended him with single-minded determination, changing the honey dressings, forcing broth between his lips, keeping the fever at bay. The wound began to heal clean, the infection retreating under her grandmother's forgotten remedy. During those long days and nights, the camp watched. They saw Margaret's devotion, her refusal to leave Daniel's side, the way she included Little Wolf in the healing process. They saw her fight for their warrior as fiercely as she'd fought for his son. She has healing hands, Singing Bird murmured, like a true medicine woman. More than that, Mary observed. She has the will to drag someone back from the spirit world. That's not skill, that's love. Margaret heard none of this, focused only on her patient, but she felt the shift in how people treated her. Women brought her food without being asked. Warriors stood guard so she could rest. Children. Little Wolf's friends brought small gifts for their friend's father. On the 10th day, Daniel was able to sit up. On the 14th, he walked shakily to the river and back. The wound had closed clean, leaving only a scar to mark its presence. That evening, as Margaret prepared to return to Mary's lodge for the first time since the crisis began, Daniel caught her hand. Wait, we need to talk. She sat beside him, aware of Little Wolf watching from across the fire. Daniel seemed to struggle for words, then spoke carefully. When the fever held me, I walked in the spirit world. Saw Sarah there. She was angry with me. Margaret's heart sank. I see. No, you don't. His grip on her hand tightened. She was angry because I was ready to join her. Said I was selfish, thinking only of my grief. Said Little Wolf needed his father. Said... He paused, looking directly at her. Said there was a woman of worth waiting in this world, and I was fooled to choose death over life. Daniel, I called for her in my fever. You heard, must have hurt you. What mattered was saving you. Yes, that's what I mean. He shifted to face her fully. Margaret, you fought for my life when I was ready to let go. You saved me with knowledge I didn't know you had. You cared for my son as your own. You've proven yourself in every way our people measure worth. I would be honored if you would consider... He stopped, started again. In the white world, There are long courtships, proper proposals. In our world, when a man and woman have proven their hearts through action, they simply choose. I choose you, Margaret Sullivan. If you will have me, not as Sarah's replacement, but as yourself, as Little Wolf's second mother, as my partner in this life. Margaret felt tears threaten. Around them, the camp had gone suspiciously quiet. Obviously, everyone was listening despite pretending otherwise. I came to you as nothing, she said softly. Sold like property, running from a life that was killing me slowly. You gave me choice when no one else would. But Daniel? I need to know you see me, not just a convenient mother for Little Wolf or a pair of hands to tend your lodge. I see Margaret who protects, he replied seriously. Who stands between children and danger, who faces down 20 men with words, who learns our ways but keeps her own strength, who pulls stubborn warriors back from death with forgotten medicine. I see you. From across the fire, Little Wolf called out. Say yes. I already told everyone you're my second mother. Don't make me look foolish. Despite the emotion of the moment, Margaret laughed. The sound broke the tension, and she heard chuckles from the watching camp. How can I refuse such logic? She squeezed Daniel's hand. Yes, I choose you too. I choose this life, this family, this path. The camp erupted in celebration. Women trilled joy cries. Warriors whooped approval, and Little Wolf launched himself at both of them in an enthusiastic hug. Finally, he exclaimed. Now I have mother and father again, and father will stop looking sad all the time. Grandmother Moon Rising approached, moving slowly but purposefully. She spoke at length in Comanche, her ancient voice carrying clearly. Standing Bear translated, grinning. She says it's about time. Says she's too old to wait for slow-thinking warriors to recognize gift when it stands before them. Says Margaret has proven herself as warrior, mother, and healer. Says the union is blessed by all who have eyes to see. The celebration continued late into the night. There would be a formal ceremony later, proper recognition of their union. But for now, there was joy and acceptance and the sense of completion. As Margaret sat by the fire, Daniel on one side and Little Wolf on the other, she marveled at the journey that had brought her here, from being sold like trash in a filthy saloon to being chosen and choosing in return as partner, mother, healer, and protector. No regrets? Daniel asked quietly under the noise of celebration. None, Margaret replied firmly. I was dying in that old life, piece by piece. Here, I've learned to live, to fight, to heal, to love again. How could I regret that? Little Wolf leaned against her sleepily. Will you teach me the honey medicine and the words your grandmother knew? Everything I know, I'll teach you, she promised. That's what families do. As the fire burned low and the celebration wound down, Margaret looked up at the stars, the same ones that had witnessed her transformation from widow to warrior, from property to person of worth, from sold to chosen. She thought of Tom, hoping he would understand and forgive. She thought of her grandmother, whose ancient wisdom had saved Daniel's life. She thought of Sarah Flying Cloud, who had walked this path before her and apparently blessed it from the spirit world. Mostly, though, she thought of tomorrow, of the life stretching ahead hard. Yes, dangerous certainly, but filled with purpose and belonging and love. She had found her place not by trying to fit into someone else's space, but by creating her own. From trash to treasure, from sold to chosen, from Margaret Sullivan, widow of Bitter Creek, to Margaret who protects, mother by choice, partner by mutual selection, healer by ancestral knowledge, and warrior by proven action. The transformation was complete, but the story, her story, their story was just beginning. Daniel's hand found hers in the darkness. Little Wolf snored softly against her other side. Around them, the people settled into sleep, secure in their circle of lodges and kinship. And Margaret smiled. Finally home. Thank you for listening to this story from the wild frontier. Where are you listening from? Please comment below so we can connect with listeners around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts on Margaret's journey from being sold like trash to being loved like fire. Your comments and experiences mean everything to us.